Ponsonby,
Don't forget
yeah.
that very small.
Braylon, Ponsonby, Hobsonville, parts of Old Auckland. Right,
Okay,
John,
right.
back into it.
We do need to move along. So maximum impervious area,
Yeah, overseas,
bit of a technical term, but really it's the maximum amount of
and all trips that,
combination of your buildings, driveways, any other hard surfaces where water can't penetrate into the ground, basically. And its purpose is to manage the capacity of the stormwater network. It also has benefits in terms of managing flooding risks and supports stream water quality and ecology. So it's a very important control. Oh, next slide, please. Sorry, Nick, you might need to move that on. So really key changes to highlight. The large lot zone started off with a maximum impervious area of 10%. Many of these sites are very large, and so the council proposed that a cap of 400 square metres went in place, and there was also 35%. So there was quite a bit of analysis to come up with a more appropriate maximum impervious area for large lots. Same with rural and coastal settlement. It's the same approach. Mixed housing urban, you had an option of 60 or 70%. Well, it wasn't really an option. For sites with a wide frontage, I think you could have a 70% maximum impervious. Smaller frontage, it was 60%. It's now just a simple 60%, so we went for the more restrictive approach there. But for the terrace and apartment building zone, because it's only applied to a very small proportion of residential Auckland, the increase, there was a 10% increase proposed there by the council, so those are the changes for maximum impervious. If we move on to building coverage and landscaping. So a lot of these controls go sort of hand in hand as a package. So building coverage, that's the total amount of a site that you can cover with buildings. Key things to highlight: large lot. Council proposed a change of going from 10% or 400 square metres, whichever was the lesser, to 20% or 400 square metres. In terms of mixed housing suburban, again, we simplified it, did away with the 40 or 50% depending on your site frontage. There wasn't really a strong argument for that. Simplified that down to a maximum building coverage of 40%. I think Councillor Brewer, you had a question about mixed housing 40%. Suburban, 40%. So we didn't propose an increase there, and in fact, arguably a slight decrease, depending on the site. Mixed housing urban, again, you have that, depending on your site frontage, it could be 40% or 50%. We simplified it to 45% and proposed that to the panel. And the terrace and apartment building zone, there was a proposed increase in maximum building coverage from 40% to 50%. Minimum landscaping, just looking at the changes there, there's nothing of any huge significance to highlight. They were pretty much staying very similar. And again, this went through the mediation and there was broad support for these controls on coverage and landscaping.
Yep, Councillor Wayne.
So I'm assuming that these changes that we're proposing under building coverage and landscaping are in sync with the earlier changes around yards that are getting smaller. So,
yes, absolutely. I mean, it's a very...
So what we have in some instances is obviously a smaller yard, significantly smaller yard, and then obviously changes in building coverage and landscaping.
Correct, yes. So we've modelled all of these controls together as one set of controls to make sure they work, and they're all interrelated together. You're right.
And are there further controls that are impacting on these areas so that we can get a handle on what the picture is overall?
Well, there's the outlook control, which requires setbacks from buildings. There's the daylight control, and
I understand all that
stuff. So, yep.
So I'm jumping the gun a bit. Is it possible to get a scenario, worst case scenario, best case scenario on what, say, a front yard looks like under these changes? And I don't need that answer right now, but obviously, given that we're interested in bigger picture stuff, what does it actually look like? So what does it look like under the scenario where you've got a developer that wants to come along and just go to the absolute max, as compared to someone that doesn't?
Yep, we've modelled the absolute worst case as part of our hearing evidence for the panel.
So it's this.
I'd be interested in seeing that.
Yeah, it's
Well, can I?
Look, I think it's coming up to,
Well, I think at the end of all these
Yeah.
presentations, Councillor Walker, we give a reference to the panel website and the specific topic where you can find the council's evidence quite easily on the panel website.
Yeah, I guess I'm interested in zooming in on worst case scenario, because my experience is that often that's what the marketplace delivers.
Yeah, and the modelling shows the worst case scenario.
Thank you.
Maximum build out. Yep.
okay. And that, I think, is something we can probably assist with, is pointing people in the right direction to have a look at the detail. However, I don't think we can always presume worst case scenario is it. As we try and get affordable housing, it could be for some cases the best case scenario.
Okay.
Next.
Right. Next slide, please. Right, quite a technical control here, but it's just to illustrate that in the mixed housing, suburban, urban and terraced apartment zones, where you're starting to get more compact development, we have a council proposed a privacy control. It was in the notified plan. We didn't propose any changes to it. There were submissions asking for different types of privacy controls or for the control to be deleted. But what it's showing, if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, principal living room. So wherever you have a living room, main living room window, directly out from that, you have to have a 6 metre deep area, 4 metres wide, where there cannot be any other buildings, either on your own site or a neighbouring site, to give you that privacy so that you can't have windows facing directly into windows. On the right-hand side, from a main bedroom, it's a 3 metre deep by 3 metre wide minimum. And then in terms of any other bedrooms, it's a 1 metre deep by 1 metre deep. Now these are the baselines. Again, any building development of 3 or more dwellings is coming in for an urban design assessment, where there's another opportunity to look at things like privacy and those sorts of things. But these are the sort of minimum standards. This one is lifted from, I think, one of the operative plans, or
residential 8 zone.
yeah, from the one of the operative ISMIS operative plan. Okay.
Right, Councillor Walker?
So if we look at an instance where you've got a house that's being built with a 3 metre setback, and you've got a bedroom in the front, and they want to have the bedroom in the front or the light because or the lounge because that's where the sun's coming from, but they want to have some privacy because it's a bedroom or it's a lounge, and they want to have a fence. How do we get on in terms of meeting the various requirements that we've got?
So are you talking about a 3 metre setback from the road?
Yes.
Yep. So you can provide your outlook over a road, so you don't need to provide that 3 metre setback from the edge of the boundary. You can provide it over the road. If you were, for example, in the terrace housing apartment zone, you have a 1.5 metre front yard, and you can provide your outlook space from that point onwards over the road. You don't need to set back from the front boundary 3 metres.
But what about the fence? The fence is 1.8 metres high.
So we're coming to the fencing control.
I'm just jumping the gun a bit.
Yeah,
I
so
see
we're
that's the
allowed.
next one.
What we've done is adapted that control so you can build parts of your fence up to 1.8 metres high to provide some privacy, and it's provided you allow over 50% of the other part of your fence as clear, so you get some visibility into your
A
property.
clear fence.
Well,
Okay, well, why don't we,
You
why
may
don't
come
we
in, no
do that
fencing, sorry.
when we get to
Yes.
fencing? Have a quick little squizzy forward, Councillor Walker, and you'll see
I've had a quick
some of
squizzy
the,
forward.
some of the stuff is coming up and may address your questions. Okay, any other questions on Outlook?
I'm just remembering.
Okay.
Okay,
So next control is the daylight control. We just move the slide on, please. I think we'll just move on. That was just an example of what the control is seeking to achieve. So the daylight control is about ensuring that there is adequate daylight into
Examples.
into internal rooms, principal living rooms and bedrooms. So some of this daylight is dealt with through the building code. But this is a control to just ensure that if there are buildings adjacent to one another in sites that are being developed for multiple dwellings, that there is a control in place to allow general daylight into these areas. So it applies in mixed housing, suburban, urban and the terrace and apartment building zone. It sort of works in combination with the previous control, the outlook space. So on its own, this might not achieve a perfect outcome, but I think with the outlook space control, it does start to avoid a situation where you've got a very dominant tall building right next to a living room or bedroom window. So they are quite technical controls. They are brought over from previous plans, and it's probably not too much to say other than that the council put this forward as a new control at the hearings. It wasn't one that was in the plan when it was notified.
And it was a control that was broadly accepted by most submitters.
Okay, next control. Dwellings fronting the streets. It applies mixed housing, suburban, urban and the terrace and apartment zone. It's to provide for some overlook or passive surveillance, technical term, so safety of the street, and contribute to the amenity of the streetscape. In the notified plan, all front facades of dwellings facing a street had to have a 30% of the frontage glazed. There were submissions saying it's very difficult to interpret exactly what that control meant. Is it front facade? If the front facade's at an angle to the street, how do you measure it? And what if the front facade is 15 metres back from the street? What's it actually achieving? So there's a lot of debate around this control. Where the council got to was any dwellings within 10 metres of the street must have at least a 10% minimum glazed frontage, and that was based on looking at a number of suburban streets where the glazing is often less than 30%, and it's still a reasonably good outcome. It's not blank walls to the street. 10% does seem quite a significant drop, but many situations in suburban Auckland, that's a situation, and it seemed like a reasonable approach. There were quite strong submissions to delete this control completely. Situations where the dwelling is behind a hedge and you can't even see the dwelling, you've got a regulation in place that's not achieving anything at all. Situations where the dwelling is on a sloping site away from the street and you can't even see the dwelling from the street, we still have a rule in place, so we've still retained the rule, but there were submissions challenging its merit.
What was the motivation of those challenging? That it was that possibly was an economic constraint or an architectural constraint? What was?
Nick, you were more involved.
Probably mainly the latter. It stifled innovative architectural outcomes. Yeah, but most were happy with the 10% because that's a minimum that anyone would provide, I think.
Can I ask why, if 10% is okay, why did we decide 30%? What was our philosophical, just to make it? Why did we settle on 30%?
We didn't set. Oh, it was back in 2013. It's going back some way. I couldn't actually say exactly why.
Just think of a number.
It seemed
A starter for 10.
Starting point.
There's room to move.
Have you got pictures of what a frontage would look with 30% or 10%?
Not as part of this presentation, but we do have some pictures available that we could send through.
Okay.
right. Fences is the next control. Just move the slide along. Thanks. Sorry, Nick. Yep, next slide. Okay. So why would we specify a maximum fence height? Well, it's obviously to get the right balance between allowing people to provide some privacy to their front yard areas and their houses, but also allowing for that passive surveillance and overall streetscape amenity. Control doesn't apply in the large lot zone, but it does apply in all of the other zones. So it doesn't apply in rural and coastal settlement either, although it did in the council's position at the hearing. So the notified plan in the single house zone, a maximum fence height of 1.6 metres, mixed housing suburban was 1.2, mixed housing urban was 1.2, and the terrace and apartment building zone was 1.2. Council's position at the hearing was 1.2 in the rural and coastal settlement, single house and mixed housing suburban. In fact, I think that's right across the board, isn't it, Nick?
Yeah, so this is
All
a
zones?
control that provides flexibility with your fence. So you can either have a 1.2 metre fence, or you can have a 1.8 metre fence for 50% of the frontage and then dropping to 1.2 thereafter. Or a 1.8 metre fence if at least 50% of the rest of the fence is visually open. And that's what I was talking about before. You could, if you had a bedroom window near the road, you could have your 1.8 metre fence in front of that for privacy, provided the remaining 50% of the fence was visually open. So you're still seeing the road from the dwelling, you're getting that visual interaction between the street and the residential dwelling. So it's more flexible.
In the historic character areas, they have their own specific controls rolled over from the operative district plans.
Yes.
So the old Res 1 and 2 and the Isthmus retained their controls by and large, maybe some refinements, but yeah, this is the more general situation. And I think most of the operative plans for general residential areas would have had a 1.8 or a 2 metre high control with no requirement for it to be transparent as the more common approach.